Okay, welcome to our next and final session of the day. This session is generally supported by Aerojet Rocketdyne and the Aerospace Corporation. New missions on the horizon are pushing for increased propulsion capabilities. Is nuclear the way to go? If so, how can we make it a safe and reliable option? This session will speak to these needs and the direction of nuclear propulsion for some of the mission applications, along with the technical, programmatic, and political challenges associated with it. To introduce our panel to talk about this, I'd like to introduce John Horak, Senior Associate Dean at The Ohio State University's College of Engineering's Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department. John, good to see you. Take it away.
Hey, Jim, thanks. And thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon. Again, our thanks to Aerojet Rocketdyne, the Aerospace Corporation, for sponsoring this 1-hour discussion on the future of nuclear in space. Also like to personally thank Brett Silcox of BWX2, who helped us coordinate the panel. He's not listed, but he was instrumental in helping us put our team together today. So as you're probably aware, there's been a lot of attention, not just recently, meaning within the past few days or weeks, but in the past several months, perhaps a year and a half or so, on the future and the integration of the role of nuclear in space, nuclear surface power, nuclear propulsion, both thermal and electric. And, you know, one of the things that we talked about before we put the panel together was, you know, what did we want to accomplish in the conversation? And where we landed, for better or worse, is that there are a lot of different, what I'll call stars in the sky, right? You can look up in the night sky and you can see many stars. And the important thing about trying to find your way forward when you're using the stars is to sort of connect them in some way, perhaps constellate them, to draw out a meaningful narrative or a shape or some common framework that can be recognized by everyone, even if it's not completely agreed upon, so that you can find your way forward. So for example, I might look up in the night sky towards the north and say, well, look at that group of stars, it's a bear. You say, no, John, it's a dipper. Well, okay, if it's a bear or a dipper, at least we're constellating and we're having a conversation about the same things, looking in the same direction and trying to figure out how to move forward coherently. And in nuclear, relative to space, you've got at least 3 government agencies in DOE, DOD, broadly speaking, and NASA. You've got Space Policy Directive that came out from the previous administration on the use of nuclear power in space. A long history now, several years of congressional authorizations and appropriations language regarding nuclear. Clear needs from a civil as well as national security perspective for additional thrust, Delta V, power on station, whether that station is in space or on the surface of something. We need to bring the outer solar system closer in time so that, as great as New Horizons was, and to my colleague Alan Stern, continuing the mission, it took 9 years to get there, smallest spacecraft we could put on one of the most powerful rockets with a Jupiter flyby. We got to bring the outer solar system closer in time. And that's also important for humans going to Mars, to minimize the amount of time in transit for both behavioral health as well as radiation and other kinds of activities, to open up launch windows, to be able to deliver more payload. We had Jim Ryder's announcement yesterday. I think Pavia will talk about that with respect to the high assay low enriched uranium fuel reactor design awards that were awarded to BWXT and General Atomics and Ultrasafe Nuclear about NTP. DARPA has the Draco program. And I learned from watching TV that even on For All Mankind, the Pathfinder shuttle in the alternative universe that we don't inhabit actually has nuclear engines. So there's a ton of things going on out there. The question is, how do we constellate them together? How do we create a coherent narrative? How can we come up with a framework that will allow us to move forward without necessarily sort of digressing or getting distracted in terms of sort of doctrinal conversations about this technology or that technology or why my idea is better than yours, and actually move something forward. So what I've asked the panelists to do, and I'll introduce them briefly, is to sort of perform this constellation. And then given a constellating of the stars that we see in the sky, we'll have a discussion about that. And our three panelists today, you can read their bios, so I'll go very briefly, but in the order that they will be asked to speak today. First, Pavya Lal, who is the Senior Advisor for Budget and Finance at NASA headquarters. And as you'll remember, before Administrator Nelson was appointed and before Deputy Administrator Melroy was appointed, Pavya had a huge role in the transition. So thank you for your service in portaging us from the previous administration to the current one. We're also joined by Tracy Bishop, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Nuclear Infrastructure Programs Office in the U.S. Department of Energy. Tracy, welcome. Glad to have you here. And we're also joined by the son of an Ohio State graduate, I've learned, Mike Bevan. Mike is on the Committee of Science and Space Technology in the U.S. House of Representatives. So we will start there. And Pavya, I'd like to give you the floor. Thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. I liked what you said, bring the solar system closer in time. That's a really good way to think about nuclear propulsion. So if you could just go to slide 2. Again, this is not a tutorial or any such thing, but just to kind of set us all in the same place. There's, when we talk about nuclear propulsion, there's nuclear thermal propulsion and nuclear electric propulsion. And thermal propulsion is pretty similar to chemical. Basically, you replace the combustion chamber with the reactor, you heat the working fluid, it goes out the nozzle, ISP because it's hydrogen. So that's essentially NTP. NEP is very similar to sort of how we generate power terrestrially. You convert thermal energy from the fission reactor into electric energy that powers thrusters. And there's lots of different kinds of thrusters, and you may have heard of some, one called Vasimir. So that's essentially nuclear propulsion. They're both, next slide, please. They're both, despite the fact that we've invested in nuclear propulsion since the 1960s, systems remain at low readiness levels. For an NTP system, the fundamental challenge is that the propellant needs to be heated to about 2700 Kelvin to get the ISP we want, which is about 900 seconds, which means the reactor has to be going up to 2900 to 3000 Kelvin, which is something we haven't done before. So that's kind of the fundamental challenge. How do we, get our materials to that level? And I'm sure Tracy will talk more about that. There's other challenges as well. There's long-term storage of liquid hydrogen in space with minimal loss. There is a need to very quickly, within a minute, bring the system to full operating temperature. And then, last but not least, there's a need to develop full-scale ground test facilities that can safely capture the exhaust. And of course, in the 1960s, we didn't worry as much about that, which is why some of those tests were done kind of out, with the exhaust, radiation-filled exhaust. There is, that ground test piece is actually pretty high cost. There's a facility preparation time. There's little integrated system testing experience, and none of it is recent. And the last relevant, as I just said, scale tests were done nearly 50 years ago. Let me make a quick side detour and tell you about a National Academies committee on this topic that I was part of. The committee was led by Roger Myers and Bobby Braun, and I hope you have a chance to read our report. And the report identified technical and programmatic challenges, merits, and risks for developing and demonstrating space nuclear propulsion technologies. We study included a demonstration roadmap for both NTP and NEP systems, and even identified missions that could be enabled by successful development of each technology. And in that report, the report assessed that an aggressive NTP program could overcome these challenges I just discussed to achieve the human baseline mission to Mars in 2039, which were the directions given to us by NASA. At the time, I wasn't at NASA. I was at an FFRDC called the Science and Technology Policy Institute. So it's possible if we start, aggressive investments. Next slide, please. Going to NEP. NEP is not further along at all. For NEP, the fundamental challenge is scaling up the operating power for each subsystem. If you remember my chart a couple of charts ago, there were sort of 6 or 7 subsystems, and each of them requires a lot of effort. And then, of course, the integration, the complexity of integrating all these different systems. And one other challenge is that we require power levels that are orders of magnitude greater than ever have been achieved. Another challenge is an NEP system will likely be combined with a compatible chemical system to provide primary thrust when departing Earth's orbit and when entering and departing Mars orbit. And again, we know we have good experience with chemical systems, but it is something that needs to be integrated. The Academy's report I just mentioned felt that there wasn't enough information on either NEP or NTP systems to make a down select, and there's need for investment in both. However, the report also mentioned that there's commonalities between NEP and NTP, and we don't need to grind to a halt to, John's point about making, forward progress, looking at that constellation and finding that arc of progress. Both NEP and NTP systems require, investments and maturation in areas such as reactor fuels, materials, additional reactor technologies, cryogenic fuel management, modeling and simulation, testing, safety, regulatory approvals. So given these commonalities, some development work in these areas can proceed independently of the selection of a particular propulsion system. So we don't need to get into a fight about that. Moving on to the next slide, I think, again, as John said, we had some exciting news this week. STMD, STMD's nuclear propulsion project, which is led out of Marshall Space Flight Center, has selected plans to award 12-month preliminary design contracts with 3 companies to explore industry reactor design approaches that could support future mission needs. So BWXT has supported NASA's nuclear propulsion efforts in the past via fuel design, reactor engineering, and materials manufacturing. They will be partnering with Lockheed Martin on this new contract. General Atomics, they have also a lot of reactor design experience on previous NASA efforts. They will be partnering with a company called X Energy and Aerojet Rocketdyne that most of you all know. Last but not least, Ultra Safe Nuclear Technologies, USNC Tech, also have a ton of advanced reactor design and analysis capabilities, and they will be teaming with Ultra Safe Nuclear Corporation, which is a parent organization, I think, or a sister organization, Blue Origin, GE, and it's in particular, it's a nuclear energy division, Framatome, and Materion. And I think the last 2 maybe US branches of maybe French companies, but don't hold me to that. At the end of the contract performance period, Idaho National Lab, which is partnering with NASA, will be examining industry design approaches from each reactor company and use the information gathered to inform the work requirements of a potential follow-on that will advance the design and provide hardware proof of feasibility tests. And then, of course, NASA will use all the information that's collected to align reactor technology maturation and development efforts. So lots of exciting work will be going on between NASA and DOE, and I'm excited to hear more about what Tracy is going to tell us about DOE activities. On the NEP front, the administration has not provided any support for propulsion. So on NEP, our connection comes from the power side. NASA and DOE are working together to mature a fission surface power system for use on Moon and Mars. And the STMD fission surface power project is led out of the Glenn Research Center. Super excited about an RFP that will be coming out soon to seek industry solutions for preliminary design of a 10 kilowatt electric class system that NASA could demonstrate on the lunar surface. Of course, the connection between NEP and fission system is that advancing a fission surface power system can help inform reactor materials and design requirements for a NEP capability, especially for small systems that would be highly useful for science missions in deep space. John, you just came on. Am I going over my time?
No, Jim asked me to turn my video back on. I understood.
Oh, okay. Okay, just checking. So on NEP, there is related work NASA is doing maturing solar electric propulsion thrusters and systems for our Artemis program, as well. Obviously, I just mentioned fission power, and we also hope to leverage significant investments in relevant fuel and reactor technologies used for small terrestrial fission power systems that can be adapted to reactor applications. Typically, Congress has supported work in nuclear thermal propulsion, but not NEP. So NASA's activities on the NEP domain have been at a much lower level. Moving on to slide 7, if you don't mind, NASA is not the only player in this domain. Is the slide moving? I can't tell. Is it the right? Is slide 7? Okay. So at DOD, starting with DOD, I don't want to spend too much time on DOE since Tracy will talk about it. The Strategic Capabilities Office, SCO, has a project called Project Pele, which is planning to design, build, and demonstrate a prototype terrestrial mobile reactor in the 2024 timeframe. They are hoping to, and as it is the case with SCO projects, they are not trying to invent new technology. They are looking at using existing technology and bringing it together to produce solutions for the Department of Defense. NASA is collaborating with SCO, and in particular, we are looking at a common use fabrication capability for LEU fuel. So that's exciting. And again, as I said earlier, what SCO does on the ground is relevant for what we might do in space. There's another collaboration that NASA has underway with DoD, in particular with DARPA, which is working on a project called DRACO. And DRACO is attempting to execute a flight demonstration in the 2025 timeframe. And the idea for them is to develop a high thrust system, which is needed for national security missions in cislunar space. And the idea being, they need to move fast. Such a system, even though it is not identical to what NASA would need for a human mission to Mars, it will provide NASA valuable knowledge in not just in technical areas like reactor and engine operation or thrust control, but also regulatory areas. So, there will be a launch regulation process that any nuclear reactor would have to go through, and I think that would be a good learning experience for NASA. Last but not least, NASA is supporting DRACO with subject matter experts, many of whom are at Marshall and other parts of NASA, and providing them access to non-nuclear test facilities. On slide 8, DOE, DOE is our rock here, provides NASA with personnel support, indemnification, launch safety, and regulatory support. Now, at DOE is where all the exciting development of reactor fuels happens. Deep technical expertise from the earliest days of the nuclear age, the space age, and as well as facilities. And NASA and DOE have long-standing established processes for collaborating on space nuclear development. And I hope that these collaborations get stronger as we move on. On slide 9, we have lots of support from the administration in this topic area. So last year, or maybe 2018, I think, the White House came out with a presidential memorandum that updates the process for launches of spacecraft containing nuclear systems. And this was pretty exciting, and I had an opportunity to work on that as part of supporting OSTP in the White House and the National Space Council. And it really updated how we think about regulation of nuclear systems. Before, we had this one-size-fits-all approach to providing launch approval, and now there is a really helpful three-tier process where, as the technology gets more complicated or as the risks grow larger, the amount of supervision that's required grows bigger. So, the heating systems will have a different approach to regulation as compared with the multi-kilogram plutonium systems. Another area where we saw innovation coming out of the White House and Space Council in particular is a space policy directive that laid out a national strategy for responsible and effective use of space nuclear systems. And last but not least, there was an executive order on small modular reactors, and that had space pieces. So it asked NASA to develop and define requirements for nuclear systems through 2040, and it also asked NASA and other agencies to develop a common technology roadmap through 2030. And today, OSTP has a working group that NASA is participating in, and the idea there is to implement SPD6, the small modular reactor executive order, and the presidential memorandum on launch approval. So all of those activities are underway, and there's just so much excitement in the community. Moving on to my get off the stage slide, I just want to say that NEP and NTP systems both show great potential to facilitate the human exploration of Mars and beyond, and scientific exploration of the solar system. But it is important to note that using either system to execute the baseline mission, Mars mission, a human Mars mission by 2039, will require an aggressive R&D program, and we don't have one quite in place yet. We are at the start of one, but we need to do more. We need to continue to, we need to address, the White House mandates on those three things I mentioned. We need to continue to collaborate with SCO and DARPA and examine potential benefits for investing together in flight demonstration missions. NTP, it's what Congress would like us to do. We need to continue to work on areas like cryogenic fuel management and next-gen systems. The fourth bullet, we need to pursue a balanced technology investment posture for both NTP and NEP. As I said earlier, there isn't enough information to kind of make a down select. So we do need to do some things in the NEP domain so we can make an informed down select decision in the next 3 to 5 years. Fifth bullet, we have surface power is a major requirement of NASA's, and we need it on the moon. We need it to develop NEP subsystems, and obviously it has NEP applications downstream. Just ending on a bit of a challenge note and areas where we need to work together harder. We need administration support for nuclear power and propulsion investments. I noted a couple of times congressional interest is only in NTP, which significantly limits NASA's ability to make an informed down select decision. And regardless of all of these, the current annual budget allocations cannot support a crewed Mars mission timeline, the 2039 timeline I mentioned. So again, an area where we need to work together to make sure we do all the right things so we can be on our way to Mars. So with that, I want to turn it over to Tracy. Unless folks have any questions, John, up to you.
Well, let's go ahead and go to Tracy. One of the stars that we mentioned in the constellating activity was the fact that we have multiple federal agencies that are not just interested in, but deeply invested in the future of nuclear and space, DOE, DOD, and NASA. And you mentioned the strong collaboration and history that NASA and DOE have. So Tracy, welcome, and we look forward to sharing your perspectives from DOE.
Thank you, John, and thank you for having me here today. Just as a cover slide here, I just want to point out that this is one of the many capabilities the department has. This is a picture of our advanced test reactor out at the Idaho National Laboratory, and it's one of the most versatile thermal irradiation test reactors in the world that allows us to do a lot of fuel samples and testing to develop next generation fuels. It's one of our key assets. Next slide, please. Well, as you've heard, the department does have a strong role in the U.S. nuclear space power arena. We've had that role now for going on 60 years as of the end of June, which was the 60th anniversary of the first radioisotope power system that launched into space. We serve primarily as the technical design authority for agencies on space nuclear power and propulsion systems. That also includes the fission systems that we're here to discuss today, as well as our isotope systems. We could do this through our vast and world-class national laboratory complex. We have 17 national labs as our crown jewels that do a wide variety of research and development activities that can support the very detailed and technical challenges that not only nuclear breaks, but merging nuclear with space, that there's just a lot of moving parts. And so we bring that skill set to bear on behalf of the government to help solve these challenges. In addition to that, the department also has the regulatory authority that we're self-governing. So we have this unique ability to be able to authorize nuclear activities to own and possess nuclear materials. So we have a nuclear safety framework that we can extend to our federal agency partners, and from that into industry as well, to develop, build, test and demonstrate, and even launch these systems. In addition to that, our national laboratories have very unique contractual relationships which allow us to go and reach out to industry to grab those capabilities and engage in those collaborations that are going to be so vital going forward. And on this slide, you just see just a smattering of the national labs that are involved in this area, particularly Idaho National Laboratory, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Oak Ridge, and Sandia National Laboratories all have played and play key roles in furthering space nuclear power activities. Next slide, please. So just to go into some of DOE's capabilities. So our focus, particularly on the nuclear areas, is we focus on nuclear fuels and materials research, development, and qualification. That also extends to other technologies. Over the last decade or so, as we have supported the growth of commercial nuclear industry for the United States to support our commercial power goals, we've invested in capabilities that also can support the space nuclear areas, and that gets into irradiation of samples and materials, post-irradiation examination to understand down to the very nanoscale level how the materials perform, so that can inform design. Looking at how we supply fuels, looking at our production of isotopes, supplies of uranium, and other necessary nuclear materials that may be required to support these systems. Extensive modeling and simulation. I think, as was mentioned before, back in the 60s, there was a lot of testing that was done, experimental testing. So now we've, as we move to the 21st century, some of that testing is very expensive. So we invest a lot in modeling and simulation, in addition to physical testing, to provide the snapshot and inform the decision-making for agencies. And then finally is doing demonstration and actually building the systems, running them, and understanding how they perform to verify their qualifications. We also have options to leverage existing user facilities across the department to enhance those technical collaborations with industry and universities. We do investments and support our university partners, which also have a lot of skills, talent, and physical equipment that can be used to help solve some of these challenges. And just to mention, look at the pictures here. This is a picture of our transient reactor test facility out at Idaho. This is where we destructively test fuel and samples. Some of the pictures below show some of the work that we're actually doing right now on the nuclear thermal propulsion fuel development activities that are underway. We're also working very closely with doing future collaborations to expand our fuel and testing to look at higher temperature fuels, as well as looking at conditions and simulating and actually conducting hydrogen testing with these materials. Next slide, please. So Space Policy Directive 6 was mentioned. I think this is one of the key areas that kind of helps inform and provides that commonality going forward between all the agencies. There was a strong emphasis in one of the sections to advance nuclear thermal propulsion technologies to meet mission requirements by the late 2020s. And there was 3 major steps identified within that directive. The first is going through and doing a requirements assessment that's really focused on the mission launching agencies, identifying what the outcomes are needed for the technology, what's the use, the time frame, what is the expected power output, propulsion output, Second step was doing technology assessments to be able to inventory the current technologies, understanding where they are, what the gaps are to getting those technologies mature to flight ready status. And then the third piece was actually doing and going through and doing technology development programs. And I think it's a very clear outline. I think this has helped to start having those conversations and focus everyone in on the same pages. And those conversations are still going on today. Next slide. So in closing, thoughts going forward for nuclear thermal propulsion, interagency and industry collaborations really do enable the future progress and are going to be critical to meeting our space goals going forward. These collaborations are going to reduce overall risk. It's going to help us leverage these critical skills across multiple disciplines that are going to need to be brought to bear to identify and develop and deploy these solutions. It also is going to help us leverage some of those common technologies, which is going to just lower costs and also schedule needs. Identifying clear mission requirements is a key first step. Not only is it going to help us identify those critical path technologies, of which there are many. Fuel is one of many that are highlighted to be able to understand what the fuel requirements are going to be. It also helps assign those agency roles and responsibilities so that we know and can pull to the people that we need to bring this solution to closure. And then focusing on technology down select early in the process is also going to be something that is key. It's going to help us maximize our efforts to advance these capabilities and allows us to do subsequent concepts to benefit from lessons learned. It also is going to help us support justifications for joint technology development plans, pull together those resource requirements. Not only is that funding, but that's capabilities, people, testing facilities, and also being able to do those experience and demonstrations that's going to lead to successful deployment. That's all I have. So thank you very much for sharing those ideas.
Tracy, thanks. That was wonderful. Thank you. We'll now turn to Mike Bevan. Mike, I think it was Buzz Aldrin that said no Bucks, no Buck Rogers. The Bucks obviously come from Congress. And as Bhavya has said, Congress has been very supportive in language authorization and appropriation for NTP. So there's interest in nuclear propulsion in space. And of course, then you also have to figure out how to appropriate those monies across at least 3 different federal agencies. So welcome, and we look forward to your perspectives in your service as a member of the Committee on the Science, Space, and Technology from the U.S. House of Representatives. Thanks.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks so much for the invitation to participate on this panel. It's I feel like we're getting the band back together because I've worked very closely, with my good friends Bhavya and Tracy in my role at the White House on the National Science Council, Space Council, sorry, several years ago, and it's kind of like, I'm going to do something a little odd here, probably, and shocking. I'm not going to use slides. I know this is a space conference, and that might be disruptive to some people. But I think what we've done so far really illustrated, this momentum that's building up, right? So, there has been interest in space and nuclear space technology in the past, and it's really started to snowball, to use a word, I guess. When I was at the Space Council, we formed what we called an interagency working group with OSTP and obviously other folks were involved, like Tracy from DOE and folks from NASA, and Bhavya was there with helping us from the Space and Technology Policy Institute. And the first thing we did was we took a hard look at since I'm naming people, I want to give a lot of credit to Dr. Aaron Miles, who was at OSTP at the time, who is actually a nuclear scientist and really helped shape a lot of these policies as we move them forward through the interagency process. And I believe he's back at Lawrence Livermore lab, but he did a tremendous job. So the first thing we did was we looked at NSPM 20 and doing a rewrite. Bhavya and both Tracy mentioned, it was sort of a dated document, and putting things through that process, through that ringer of launch approval that were vastly different. It really didn't make any sense, and it was time. It took a lot of time, and it took a lot of money to do that. It was duplicative. So we're really happy to have that put out. That was in NSPM, so that's actually a document from the National Security Council. So that was a really important thing. Is the National Security Council was completely on board with everything that we were working on, and part of the process as well. We also started work on the Space Policy Directive 6. And also the EO for small nuclear or small modular reactors. And, a lot of that work was actually completed probably a year before it actually came out, because as you get towards the end of a term in the administration, things sort of start to hit the roadblocks during the election cycle. And finally, they were able to get those out the door. I had already left and gone back to NASA at that point. But they were able to push them out the door, and it was really a tremendous effort on the interagency part. All the credit, goes to the folks that worked on those working groups, and really kept the pedal down on the momentum for looking at not only NTP and NEP, but when we were on the council, we'd have a lot of discussions about going back to the moon and what we wanted that to look like. And we always came at it from a very energy rich perspective. I think Dr. Pace, who was the secretary at the time, he would say, he in the habitat, he wanted, the curtains drawn and the tea boiling. And, when the astronauts arrived, we didn't want to have a situation where we were, counting kilobytes or watts or something. So obviously, nuclear power is part of that mix, and a very important one, especially for a permanent settlement. And we looked across the board at what folks were doing. It's one of the benefits of being in the White House. And, there were all these, programs that were ongoing. Some of them mentioned today, like Pele and Draco and some others. And not that any of that was wrong, kilopower at NASA, but there was a lot of, let's just say, from the 1,000 or 60,000 foot level, it seemed like there could be a tighter coordination between all those different things. And at the end of the day, the last thing you want is some kind of, environment where you have all these bespoke, reactors or approaches, that don't, build off each other and collaborate together and things like that. And so we have a more of a national push for what we want to do in space, whether it be for propulsion or for surface power or other applications. So that was really the impetus behind SPD 6, was to get everybody to the table and talking and like you said, constellating, what we're going to do moving forward. And of course, that's great. It's good stuff to put things in policy and have everybody agree. But if you don't have dollars behind that, then or continue with that coordination level, that makes things really, really hard. So, it's encouraging to me to hear that, that we're still moving forward with a lot of this at OSTP, and their different working groups that they're working on it to implement those recommendations and the policies, and then it just switch gears over to the other branch of the government where I am back. We have seen a lot of direction from Congress over the years for NTP, but you will see soon even more direction, and also direction for NEP and for fission surface power. very maybe as early as tomorrow. There'll be more information coming out on that. This is a timely panel, but certainly you know, the folks in Congress, they understand it. They see the momentum. You know, they want to add you know, real dollars. They want to. One of the things, since you do control the money, you also get to add a little direction on how some of that's spent. So you'll probably see some of that as well coming out, where you know, perhaps new offices within NASA to really, you know, look at this and really organize it, I should probably say. So yeah, there's it's an exciting time to see all this happening, and I kind of look at it from you know, 20 years ago, we were you know, talking a lot of we'd passed a commercial space bill in 1999, and there was a bunch of cool stuff that was happening, you know, and secretly Burt Rutan was building a rocket plane to go to space, and then, you know, a couple of years later, they actually did it in 2004. And then here we have Branson just flew a couple days ago. I didn't think it would take 16 years, but it did happen. So I kind of see like where we are now with, you know, commercial nuclear, you know, the companies like Ultrasafe and X Energy and some of the other ones. We had a whole lot of startups that came through when I was at the White House that talked to us about what they're doing, really innovative things. And you know, the regulatory environment you know, needs to be reactive to that and help facilitate it. I think there was an announcement today about China just opened their first commercial small reactor. I think it's an island off of the mainland or something like that. Anyway, we want to continue our U.S. leadership in this area, and it's exciting to see all the work that's going on. And I kind of look at where we are right now with commercial, you know, small modular reactors and other technologies that we're looking at, like with HALEU and other things like that. You know, we're sort of at the point where we were with commercial space back, you know, in 2000. You know, it's like the momentum is building. There's a lot of great stuff that's coming out. People are thinking of all kinds of different applications, and you know, I think the future is really, really bright, and I'm very, very bullish and optimistic on it. And I think you'll see really good language, both in appropriations and in authorization language, at least from the House where I sit. You know, there is a NASA authorization bill that came over from the Senate that they tacked on to one of their other big bills that was moving. And certainly we're taking a close look at that and coordinating closely with them on what we're going to do. But there's also you know, potential for some standalone legislation that we might look at for doing specific things when it comes to space nuclear power and other applications. So I think with that, I'll leave it. I don't want to rehash the EO or SBD 6 or what NASA's just released. That's a tremendous thing. Oh, I guess one other thing I would mention too is, you know, on the DOE side, X Energy and I believe that BWXT and one more, I think, they were awarded contracts to begin constructing test reactors, and that was in the order of billions of dollars. I think that was just last year. Tracy, you probably know a lot more about that. Or you do know a lot more about that than I do, but it's amazing to see all the energy, no pun intended, that's going into this right now. So. With that, I'll stop, and we can have a discussion or questions or whatever.
Perfect. One of the things you mentioned, the energy and the bright future, and one of the things that I spent 30 years in Huntsville and now 5 in Ohio, and the excitement of the students that we have and the young people that are engaged, men and women that want to work in this area and figure out how to go faster and farther and build more powerful engines and power supplies for surface power. If the enthusiasm is any indication of the future, we can probably generate more joules out of the enthusiasm of the young men and women that want to do this than we'll ever get out of the actual hardware itself, because the enthusiasm is high. And just sort of, you know, they even, you guys need an acronym. I said, well, yeah, it's NASA, we need an acronym. So my students have coined this Jesse Owens, which of course binds North Alabama and the state of Ohio through a American hero, fast, powerful, 4 gold medals at the Berlin Olympics. Jump-starting exploration, sprint spacecraft explorers open windows on exploration through nuclear systems. So that's how they propose to put Marshall and Glenn on the same page. Name it after an American icon, and I hope nobody in Congress would ever cancel a program called Jesse Owens. All right, so Jim, I know there's some questions from the audience, probably not around how did my students come up with Jesse Owens, but let's hand it back to you in the booth.
They're all asking you to repeat that acronym is what they're doing. So just
I'll type it in the chat.
So on a related note, though, one of the questions from the audience is talking about workforce. So are there any particular challenges with NTP, NEP related to the workforce, or that other emerging technology areas might not be facing? Quantum computing, hypersonics, et cetera, stuff like that. So is there a generational gap? Are the right people coming out of schools and getting into this field to allow it to progress at the rate that we need it to? So I'll put that out there for the group.
Well, so as the university person and current university person, yeah, there's always challenges, right? It's a lot like Apollo in a certain sense. So we say, oh, we've been to the moon. Well, yeah, all the people that actually, turned wrenches and welded things and bent metal, they're not active in the industry. And so the folks that worked on NERVA, I mean, there may be a few, but by and large, it's a new workforce. Secondly, you wouldn't go do it the way you did it before anyway, because you've got computational fluid dynamics and ANSYS and modeling and simulation and new kinds of manufacturing capabilities, new materials. So that's actually both a blessing and an upside and a downside. And third, I guess, and this is something that we work on here, we're lucky that we have nuclear, mechanical, and aerospace engineering all in the same department. And so to have this sort of valence between the disciplines to create what's really needed as an integrated technology product and outcome and set of knowledge, as opposed to some nuclear knowledge, some aerospace knowledge, and some mechanical knowledge, and some materials knowledge that you can sort of put together in a conglomerate rock. We really need to create a molecule, not just so new ways and interesting ways to bind the disciplines together to get what we need. Full stop.
So I would agree with what John said, and I would add to that. So the National Academies Committee I was on did look at the workforce issue and did say that if efforts to scale up nuclear systems as need to be done to make a 2039 timeline or even the early 2040s timeline, there will be shortfalls in the workforce. In addition to shortfalls, the committee, I think, identified 3 other challenges. The first one was that the sector suffers from a lack of gender and ethnic diversity. The second one was non-aerospace technology companies compete with aerospace companies, and that's something we need to think about. And last but not least, the committee felt that export control regulations and the classified nature of some of the research and technologies preclude non-US citizens from participating, constraining the size and quality of the pipeline. So this was the determination of the Academies Committee.
Anybody else?
This is sure. From the Office of Nuclear Energy for many years has recognized the need to have a pipeline of qualified individuals coming through to support commercial nuclear areas. We've spent a lot of energy supporting both undergraduates and graduate students by offering fellowships. We also have a very strong program where we partner with universities to be able to provide awards to do entry-level research and development to feed into all of our R&D lines. So for a long time, we've recognized the need to grow that pipeline. We're looking at how to expand that to broader skills and crafts that are going to be needed, across the multiple disciplines that are going to be required to support this effort. So it is a very important area, and it's exciting to see that, you know, that there's a lot of support and momentum going forward to continue to recognize that we've got to bring the next generation up with us to share in this effort.
Great. Yeah. We talked yesterday about workforce, especially mid-career and retention and things like that. And so, I mean, that's all obviously clearly critical to this. Another question, this one's pretty technical, and I think it was early on in the presentation, so it might have been you, Bhavya, but a typical lunar transfer is about 3 days. The fastest transfer possible is about 1 day. So what's the value of saving 1 or 2 days on a lunar transfer for DARPA? Was that covered, or is that a just out of the park question?
You know, that is a good question, but this is
Okay.
not a question I want to address in this meeting. It's a question for
Gotcha.
DARPA.
Okay, gotcha. Just checking. All right, so let's see what else
Actually,
you got. Oh, go ahead.
Maybe weigh in a little bit on that, since I don't sit on the administration anymore. But as you can imagine, space is becoming more and more contested, and there's other actors that are looking to do certain things. So if you're able to move assets around quicker, perhaps that gives you an advantage, and that's all I'll say.
Okay, got it. Thanks. All right, so let's see, another question here. Beyond what has been announced, what investments in NEP or NTP core technologies do you foresee or would you like to see at NASA over the next 3 to 5 years to enable the down select that's noted in the time frame?
I guess I can take that. I mean, I don't think there's anything that goes necessarily. I mean, I named the big areas. We need to invest in those. So on the NTP side, we need to focus on the materials challenge. How do we get reactive materials to 3000 Kelvin? How do we protect the reactive materials against hot hydrogen attacks? A long-term storage of liquid hydrogen at 20 Kelvin. I mean, the hydrogen molecule is so small, it just goes through, right? The lack of adequate ground-based test facilities. A ground facility may cost $1 billion or more. Launching large volumes of hydrogen. And then on the nuclear electric front, I mean, the scale up of NEP subsystems, the complexity of the assembly and integration, the verifying of the reliability of the years of operation needed. And the way I think about it is, and again, I'm happy to listen to other views on this. With NTP, I see that, I mean, it's an easier system. I see it as a complicated issue. We need to solve a series of problems, but we can see how it goes forward. NEP, in my mind, is more of a complex system, and we don't even understand how these how the subsystems would interact with each other. And there's so many of them. So there's sort of this complicated complexity challenge that we need to also address. In the very long term, we need to have both NTP and NEP because they do different things. But in the near term, we do need to invest in both, enough in both that we can figure out which one do we want to go first with. And as the Academy's report said, NTP is feasible by 2039, whereas NEP likely isn't.
Gotcha. Anybody else on that? Good. Tracy?
Sure. I would agree. Materials and fuels is probably one of the areas that would need to could benefit from some focus, an additional focus. That's always been a very long timeline area. I think we're looking at ways where we can do more broader scale testing and coupling that with modeling and simulation to try to shorten some of the timelines to be able to understand better the properties and focus in on those high quality candidate fuels to carry forward to full qualification and testing and how we kind of do that screening process. So that would probably be my main suggestion of areas if we were to all kind of look at commonalities across all the programs. So the fuels and materials would be it.
And I think if we can find a way forward to do a lot more of that testing in space than on the ground, we're going to be well advantaged. Yeah, nobody's going to go out to Jackass Flats in Nevada and blow one up on purpose. That's just not going to happen, which we did. You know, those kinds of tests, very environmentally hostile testing during the 60s and 70s. So we'll learn better, faster, in my view, if we can figure out how to chunk the work and test in space as much as possible. And I don't know if that's, you know, send a 6-pack of Budweiser to Phobos and call it good, and then build the next, whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily have to be the all-up, most sophisticated mission to test everything possible. But to gain the fluency with how to operate nuclear systems in space, apply Delta V, move around, store cryo, handle some of these hot hydrogen and materials questions, the more we can do in space, I think the better we're going to be.
Yeah, we used to say on the council that there's no NEPA in space, so it probably makes it easier.
Yeah, and you're launching nuclear materials, but you're not launching hot reactor, right? In most of these conversations, we're not. It's a different conversation than if you're launching MMRTG with plutonium inside that's hot and active. So it's a different regulation environment. Still needs to be regulated and done safely and carefully and prudently. Don't misquote me on that. But it's a different kind of launch than perhaps what many people might have in mind.
But more of an addressable concern from, you know, public perception or legislative, you know, perception or something like that, where you can say this is safe, this is that kind of thing. But don't you think you're going to have some voices out there just saying, you know, are we launching, you know, radioactive materials to some other body and just leaving them there? Aren't we polluting beyond our planet? I mean, what's the counter argument to that?
But one counter argument I have is, you know, we kind of have this vision of space being this pristine environment. I mean, space is the most radiationally invasive environment you can imagine. I mean, sending our astronauts to Mars without any protection would fry them. So for us to think that somehow this one reactor will create enough radiation that overpowers the background radiation is just lack of knowledge. And I think it behooves us as a community to educate and let some of these things out so people understand. So that's on us to do that.
And, you know, the addition of power, thrust, maneuverability gives you more disposal options, right? So perhaps, you know, you're moving a spacecraft to Mars, you're trying to get there in 100 days. You get there, you've got additional Delta V, you've solved some of the cryofluid management issues that Pavia and others talked about with hydrogen. You deposit it into the inner solar system. You say, you know, we're gonna run it into the sun. That's where we're gonna take it when the mission's over. And the sun presumably should be able to take care of most of our environmental challenges.
And I just wanted to take the opportunity to add that the NSPM 20, our new launch safety framework that was rolled out in 2019, really went a long way to really modernize how we look and approach at ensuring not only have we clearly identified the risk and that we've addressed the hazards and been able to mitigate to the extent we can, both on terrestrial activities during launch and even considerations for post-launch operations. You know, being able to take and looking at these tiered risk levels that are tied to U.S. nuclear regulatory frameworks that have been established, promulgated, and utilized for decades, that really is going to help kind of pull this all together. So, you know, the hazards are different based on the system, but they're tied to the system. They're tied to safety controls and other aspects, but it doesn't change the process to be able to evaluate, communicate those risks, and going forward to looking at the best ways to mitigate them going forward as we move these technologies to application.
Excellent. And then we're basically out of time, but I did have one more question. Some guy named Brett Silcox is posting a question, and I think this might be for Mike. Are legislative hurdles for launching these new systems? If so, how are those legislative hurdles being addressed?
It's a great question from my good friend Brett, and we've had this discussion in the past. And yes, I think for maybe everyone's awareness, we do have for launch in particular, we do have our new guidelines, regulations, NSPM. Tracy was just explaining. And then, for commercial launch in the U.S., the FAA, does the launch license, and there's a payload review process that happens as a part of that, that the interagency, they get to see what's happening. But so what I would say to prospective companies, folks, Brett, is that from my perspective, Mike Bevan's perspective, the answer is yes. We can go do these things. It's sort of a brave new world. I pity the company that has to go through it first. But we're gonna find a way to make it happen. And in the current regulatory environment, I don't see there being hurdles for it. But certainly, red flags get thrown up all the time on things. But folks, especially in Congress, are ready to react to those and help provide additional guidance and things for agencies and the administration. So, in my mind, again, I'm pretty optimistic. I'm pretty bullish. I think there's a way to do these things in a safe manner. To John's point, we don't take any of this lightly. And we never should, but we do need to maintain, our leadership in the world on this, and quite frankly, we are the leaders. There's stuff up there that the Soviet Union would probably disavow at this point, but we need to be appropriate in how we handle things. So, former Soviet Union, I should say.
Good. Well, we are out of time. We've gone a little bit over, and we could probably talk for another hour, but great stuff. So John, I'll turn it over to you for any very brief closing comments.
I just want to thank Bobia and Tracy and Mike and Jim. Thank you, and Alan and the AAS for hosting the panel, and our sponsors, Aerojet Rocketdyne and Aerospace Corporation. And I first learned about Ohio State when I was a little boy in St. Louis, growing up listening to the Cardinals on KMOX radio, and their broadcaster, Jack Buck, was a Buckeye, and he would always close with his signature sign-off, "Thanks for your time this time, till next time, so long." So maybe I'll stop with that.
There you go. Well, yes, thank you so much to there you go. Thank you so much to everybody for doing this today. We really appreciate all your time, and what a great conversation. So with that, that concludes our day 2 of the Glenn Symposium, the 3rd annual Glenn Symposium. So thank you to all of our speakers and panels for a great day. Thank you to all of our event sponsors, the Aerospace Corporation, Aerojet Rocketdyne, Ball Aerospace, Dynetics, Lockheed Martin, Maxar, Moog, Teledyne Brown Engineering, and our media sponsor, Space News. And thank you to everybody at the NASA Glenn Research Center. We appreciate your help in putting this together. And thank you, of course, to all of our attendees. Thank you for being here, and we hope to see you all tomorrow. We'll get started at 11 a.m. for our 3rd and final day of this 2021 Glenn Symposium. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.